Hi, I'm Gerald Walker, and today on Kinetic Karnival I'm going to show you what is called the Leidenfrost effects. You might have seen some of this physics before in your kitchen, but I'm going to show you some more dramatic examples of the stuff. I'm going to dip my fingers into molten lead, put liquid nitrogen, which is about negative 200 degrees Celsius, in my mouth, and after this bonfire burns down, I'm going to try and walk on hot coals. I may get very badly hurt, the demonstrations may not work out, but I'll try to explain the physics behind the demonstrations. See you in a moment.
The Kinetic Karnival, energized by Dr. Gerald Walker, professor of physics, columnist for Scientific American, and author of the book, Flying Circus of Physics with Answers.
Today I'm going to tell you about something that I bet you've seen at least once a week throughout your life, but I bet you never paid much attention to it. I first noticed it when I was at my grandmother's house, a little kid, and she was making pancakes for me. And she wanted to check to see if the skillet was ready for the batter. Did something a little bit strange. She took a little bit of water and she sprinkled it into the skillet. And the water did what it properly should do if you sprinkled it into a skillet. It sizzled away in 1 or 2 seconds or something like that. And she said, "Gerald Jr." She liked to call me Gerald Jr. "Gerald Jr., the skillet's not ready for the batter. We have to heat up the skillet a little bit more." Okay, so we wait. We heated up the skillet. And she again, to check the temperature of the skillet, sprinkled in a little bit of water. I expected the water to sizzle away in less than 1 or 2 seconds now because the skillet was obviously hotter. It didn't sizzle away that quickly. It beaded up and lasted for upwards of 1.5 minutes, dancing and skimming around on the hot skillet, kind of mocking us that we had thrown it down, thinking it was going to evaporate. Didn't evaporate at all. This skillet is quite hot. If I put some water in it, the water immediately beads up, floats around. In fact, you can get some rather large amoeba-like structures there, or maybe some little tiny drops kind of gracefully floating around. That effect is called the Leidenfrost effect, after one of the first people to investigate it scientifically. Here's what happens. If I throw some water down on a reasonably hot piece of metal, let's say about 150 degrees Celsius or something like that, the water drop hits, spreads out, evaporates away because the metal is much hotter than the boiling temperature of water. That's what happens on a reasonably hot skillet. If I throw the water drops down on a really hot piece of metal, really hot skillet, hotter than 200 degrees Celsius. Could maybe be 250 degrees Celsius, but as long as it's more than 200. As a water drop approaches the hot piece of metal, the bottom part of the drop immediately vaporizes. Then I have a rather thin layer of water vapor between the hot metal and the remaining liquid. It's probably much less than 1 millimeter thick. But that's the thing that saves the water drop from an early death. That's the thing that allows it to dance and skim around for upwards of 1.5 minutes, maybe even longer if you've got a really big structure. This is the Leidenfrost effect. There are 3 ways that you can transfer heat. Convection. You're used to that, especially during the summertime. Hot air rises away from you to the top of the ceiling. Cold air descends. No convection's going on in the skillet. The second way you can transfer heat is by conduction. Maybe you've seen this, like when you have a poker and you stick it in a hot fire. The other end of the poker obviously heats up because it's in the fire. And what I mean by heating up is I mean that the molecules there start jiggling around. And they bump into next door neighboring molecules and jiggle them around. And this jiggling comes traveling along the hot poker until it starts jiggling the molecules in your hand, and you say, ow, what a dumb thing, I've stuck a poker in a hot fire. That's conduction. There is conduction going on in the skillet through the water vapor layer, that very thin layer. But the point is that vapor, or gas in general, conducts very, very poorly. Probably 10 times less well than just liquid alone, liquid water would, and certainly much, much poorer than a solid would. So I'm getting a very slow conduction through that vapor layer. It takes a while to get enough heat to go through it to finally kill off the remaining liquid in the drop or the amoeba-like structure that's up there. Third way you can transfer heat, radiation. Radiation, heat radiation, you probably have noticed it when you stand in front of a fireplace. You feel warm, but it's not because of conduction, because the air between you and the fire conducts very poorly. And it's not because of convection, because the hot gases from the fire go up the chimney, not out into the room, or you'd have a really smoky room. You feel warm because of radiation. This invisible light, at least most of the time it's invisible. Your eyes are not sensitive to that type of light. Radiation comes from the fireplace to you to warm you up. Well, there's radiation going on in the skillet right now. There is some radiation coming from the skillet through the vapor layer to the drop. I cannot do anything at all about how fast heat comes up to the liquid by radiation. But because I do have a vapor layer there, I can cut down on the rate of conduction. Take a minute and a half to finally bring this stuff up to full temperature, evaporation, boiling point of water, and then the drop disappears. The water right now is hitting a relatively cool portion of the skillet because this is electrical circuit down here, it's not even heating. When it's off away from that kind of warm place, not particularly hot, we get Leidenfrost effect, and when it hits the kind of warm place, all of a sudden it starts to boil away. See if I can kind of quiet it up here. Now, you probably have seen the same bit of physics elsewhere. Back in the old days when people used to iron, I know not many people iron anymore, they would sometimes check the temperature of the iron by touching it. My grandmother didn't iron with a nice thermostat back here like the modern irons have. She just had a plain old iron that she heated up, maybe even in the fireplace in the really old days. But she could tell the temperature of that iron by sticking a wet finger. She'd lick her finger or stick it in some water in a bowl and touch it up against that metal. There goes the calibrated sizzle. Can you hear that little sizzle? Just a little bit of sizzle there. Some of the water goes to vapor state, vibrates against my finger and the piece of metal, and that's the sound that you hear, very faint little sound. My grandmother would not hurt herself when she tested the temperature in this way because of the Leidenfrost effect. Part of that water would go to vapor state. Very thin vapor layer of water vapor between the hot iron and her skin, her tender little skin. And for as long as that touch took, she would not really even feel much of any sensation of heat, much less get a little bit of burn there. It really wouldn't be much fun to iron if you, every time you tested the iron, you would burn the dickens out of your finger. So you might have also seen the exact same of physics if you're really into French cooking. If you make crepes, I think that's the way you pronounce it. I'm from Texas, so I'm not quite sure. If you make crepes, there's a lot of mystique that you need a nice crepe pan. Well seasoned, you got to really take care of it. And they tell you in most of the cookbooks that you don't want to heat up the pan too much just before you put the batter in. If it's too much, you're going to get a really crispy crepe, and it's not going to be very pretty to look at. It's got burned edges and stuff like that. They say keep the pan hot enough, but not so hot that the water beads up when you sprinkle a little bit inside. And what they're telling you, in their kind of mystical way, avoid the Leidenfrost effect. Keep the pan no hotter than 200 degrees Celsius, or you're going to beat up the water and you will fry your crepe. Well, all that stuff about having a well-seasoned pan, baloney. I've been told by French chefs that you don't need a well-seasoned pan. You could, in fact, cook a crepe on the bottom of a hot iron. So I thought I would try that here. This iron, now I don't really know how hot it is. Let me try this. And it's a little bit too hot. I'll turn it down just a little bit. The water beat it up, and so it's not quite right for the crepe batter. A little bit cooler. Okay, they're dancing around right onto my skin and burning my arm. But anything in the name of science. Okay, I'm going to cook a crepe here. I got to apply just a little bit of butter so my crepe does not stick to the iron. Oh boy, that looks good. Right there. Can you smell that? It looks just right, just right. Butter's not browning too much or anything. Okay, got a little bit of butter there. And now I have this crepe. I've made my batter with a little bit of beer, so I like beery crepes. And now I'll pour this on here. And there we go. Uh-oh, it's going down in the hose. Wait a minute. It's overheating just, oh, it's, wait a minute, see, I got to flip it over. So maybe a little bit more batter. Whoops. Probably going to electrocute myself here. But it's just about the right temperature. I checked it with that Leidenfrost effect. It was just barely starting to beat up those drops. And there it looks like scrambled eggs is what it looks like. Maybe you should use a crepe pan after all, because maybe a hot iron is... if you really want to impress a French chef, you're in a restaurant sometime, whip out a hot iron and cook one right at the table side. It kind of add a nice romantic feel to the French restaurant, a little iron. Trouble with those crepes, though, is that the crepes taste a little bit like a Chinese laundromat when you're through. I've got another demonstration of the exact same physics, the Leidenfrost effect. This is molten lead. Now, I don't really know how hot it is. Lead melts at about something like 300 degrees Celsius, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. And I've tried to get this lead much hotter than that, because if I don't, I'm really going to be in a lot of trouble. If I throw a little bit of water down on the top of the lead, I get beating up, I get a support of the water drops away from the hot metal by the Leidenfrost effect. And they're beating up, and they're lasting. They're still lasting, as a matter of fact. Kind of dancing around. Whoops, a little bit too much. Don't want to hurt myself. Let me show you that this lead is really hot. I hope it's probably 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Here's a Oscar Mayer wiener. Now, this wiener is not a gracious volunteer, because it does not want to do what I'm about to do to it. But I'm going to make this wiener go down into this molten lead. The lead, let's say it's 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You can cook a piece of meat 200 degrees Fahrenheit without any trouble, slightly below the boiling temperature of water. This is much, much hotter liquid, and I'm going to force this volunteer wiener down into the molten lead. I want you to see what happens to it. Here we go. Boy, it sure doesn't want to go in. Few seconds, and that wiener is just cooked to a crisp. Now, unless it's too hot, let me break this open for you. It's not cooked on the inside. This heating took place so rapidly, in 5 or 10 seconds or so, something like that, that only the outside was charred. And there wasn't enough chance to conduct the heat through the wiener to the center of the wiener. So only outside has been burnt like that. Makes really good baseball frankfurters if you're at a baseball with some molten lead. Now let me kind of clean off all the oil. I hope this works. What I'm going to do is touch another piece of meat down onto this really hot metal, this liquid metal. I'm going to use my finger. You can cook a piece of meat 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit here. I'm going to stick my finger down on that stuff, the little piece of meat. But I'm going to first wet my finger. Wet my finger, touch the molten lead, 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No sensation of heat, much less damage to my finger for a little touch like that. It's kind of like touching the hot iron. The Leiden-frost effect saves me from a really bad burn. I touch with my finger, and the part of the water that's on my finger goes to vapor state. A little bit of gas there. Between me, my tender little flesh, and this molten liquid is a very thin vapor layer, probably much less than a millimeter thick. But that's what protects me from a nasty burn. In fact, I feel no sensation of heat while I've got my finger touching there. It takes longer than that brief touch to conduct and radiate enough heat through that thin vapor layer till I finally start to heat up my finger and I start to finally scream with pain that I've done this. I tell you what, I'm really feeling masculine today. I'll do the following. I'll wet all 4 fingers and I'll go all the way down to the bottom, touch bottom, and then come back up again. The Leidenfrost effect will save me. Hopefully, yes. Very hopefully. Wet my fingers. Maybe get all that grease from the frankfurter off. Okay. Wet my fingers all the way down to the bottom, touch, come back up again. Leidenfrost effect. Save me. No sensation of heat. I just touch bottom, come right back up again. Want to make sure my fingers are wet. I mean, this is not the smartest thing to do in life, you know, stick your fingers into molten lead. I've tried it a few times before. The first time I tried it, I went down and I missed the pot altogether. My brain said, no, 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 you don't want to do that. Okay, here we go. I'm really feeling masculine. I know I can do it without really seriously hurting myself. Touch, bottom. Had me worried there for a minute. No damage to my fingers at all. I don't dilly-dally around in there, you know. But for as long as I stay in, not only is there no massive damage to my fingers, but there's hardly any sensation of heat because of the Leidenfrost effect. Part of the water on my fingers goes to vapor state, and I get a very thin but protective sheath around all my fingers, and I don't get badly burned. In fact, there's very little heat transferred through that vapor layer by conduction or radiation during my brief plunge in. I'll try this just one more time. One begins to enjoy this after a while. Go all the way down to the bottom, touch, come back up. I should tell you the danger on this in case anybody ever had an intense desire to stick their fingers into molten lead. The one danger is that I could be really badly burned on my fingers. That's obvious. I could also spill this stuff onto my pants and I'd be in a whole lot of trouble. The real danger to me, even if it's set up just right, is if I go in, suppose this lead is just barely above its melting point. I go in and I happen to cool the local lead around my finger so that it solidifies. It would grab hold of my finger and I wouldn't be able to get my finger out. And you folks would see a real show up here. I'll try this one more time. I just hope that this stuff is hot enough that it doesn't freeze up on my fingers, because then we're all in a lot of trouble. Here we go. No sensation of heat, except a little bit under the fingernails where I caught some of the lead and it stuck there, and it's hurting like the dickens right now. But that's all right. I'm on TV, so I'll just pretend that I'm not hurt at all and just go on. This another example of the Leidenfrost effect. I got yet another one. This is going to be with something really cold. All these other demonstrations, Leidenfrost effect with something that's really hot. Here goes something that's really cold. Got a nice pretty flower, and I've got a vat, a dewar of liquid nitrogen. This stuff is very cold. It's negative 200 degrees Celsius. Stuff is really quite cold. And I'm first going to do something that I saw on TV, Mr. Wizard, when I was a kid. Really impressed me. In fact, it's one of the fundamental reasons I went into physics, because I wanted to grow up and do things just like this. Well, here's my motivation for going into physics. I'm going to take this poor innocent flower, doesn't understand what's going to happen to it. I'm going to dip it down into, whoops. Think we're okay. Nothing's blowing up or shorting out. I'm freezing the flower. It'll take about a half a minute or so. Part of the liquid nitrogen is boiling away as that room temperature flour is dropped to negative 200 degrees Celsius. And I think it's just about completely frozen to that temperature right now. And I want to show you what happens when you have something that cold. Just a little bit more. Okay, here we go. Really cold stuff. Just shatters. And now each little piece will dry out. Maybe take 5 or 10 seconds or so. Each little piece is still quite cold to the touch. This stuff is really dangerous. If you get it on your skin, it will destroy skin cells just as readily as an open flame would. So you have to be very cautious with this stuff. However, let me show you something. Am I man enough, or what? Let me ask you. How come it is that my tongue doesn't shatter now like that flower did? The Leidenfrost effect. This time not with water vapor, but with nitrogen vapor. I put this liquid nitrogen, it's normally gas that you breathe. I put this really cold liquid nitrogen in my mouth. The bottom portion of that big drop that I put in there, big section of nitrogen, vaporizes. And just then I have, between my innocent little tongue and the remaining liquid nitrogen, a very thin but protective vapor layer of nitrogen vapor protecting me. It takes probably a minute and a half to get enough heat radiated away from my tongue or conducted away from my tongue before my tongue, the top surface of my tongue, would cool down to where I would be in trouble. Well, I keep it in about that long. Let me do this one more time. And then when that liquid is in my mouth, I breathe out over the top, and you get a condensation plume out here. It's kind of like a medieval dragon or something. Just in case you're ever tempted in a challenging situation to pour liquid nitrogen into your mouth, let me tell you about the dangers involved. One danger is that about every other time I do this, the doer freezes to my lip. This is kind of like when you're a little kid, your mom says in midwinter, really cold day, don't go outside and lick the water pipes or your tongue will freeze to the water pipe. As if you ever really wanted to go out and lick a water pipe, you know? Well, if you do, if you were tempted for some perverted reason to go lick water pipes, you probably would lose a layer of skin off your tongue because the water in your tongue will freeze right into the metal surface of the water pipe. And in a panic, or at least a little kid would pull a head back very quickly and rip off the tongue. It would be a really gory mess. You can't just pour warm water on it and the freezing would undo itself and you can remove the tongue with no damage. My lip freezes to this doer and I get a row of blisters inside my lip. I'm a terrific kisser after that, let me tell you. That's one danger. The other danger is that you pour it onto your clothes and it stays there too long, then you start destroying skin. Third danger, most serious of all, is that you have a swallow reflex. Jiminy Christmas, I worry about this. You pour this in because normally you swallow and you have something in your mouth, you suddenly swallow the stuff down, and then you freeze the throat and the stomach because the stuff will be in your stomach much, much too long. I have, yet again, a demonstration of the Leidenfrost effect, but I think we need to go to a different scene in order to do it justice. Let me show you an old barroom trick. Got a lit cigarette, cold bottle of beer here, a little bit of moisture on the side. Without anybody really knowing what I'm doing, I wet my fingers in this moisture, maybe a little bit of spilt beer here on the bar. And then I say to my friend, I'm so masculine that I can hold a lit cigarette between my thumb and my first finger without hurting myself, without even flinching. Well, how can I do that? Just between you and me, how can I do that? The moisture on my finger does two things for me. Part of it will quench some of the fire here, so I get a little bit of dead ash. No problem then. But if I continue to hold the cigarette, I got to rely on something else. Part of the moisture will go to vapor state, and I get a very thin vapor layer, water vapor, between my tender little flesh here and the remaining lit portion of the cigarette. It takes a while for enough heat to go through that little vapor layer to finally hurt my finger. Well, I can hold it that long. Then, without anybody really understanding what's going on, I challenge the masculinity of my friend, tell him he now has to hold the cigarette. He takes it, but he doesn't know about the moisture from the beer bottle. He takes it and burns the heck out of himself. Here, let me show you how it works. Lit cigarette, a little bit of moisture, a little bit of beer from the bar, something like that. I hold it between my thumb and first finger. Ow! Ow! Wait a minute, wait a minute. Keep the camera going. I can do this. I'm masculine enough. I can do this. Hurt like the dickens, though. Lit cigarette, a little bit of moisture here, kind of being sly about it, you know. I take it like this. It worked, as a matter of fact. All right, now I want to see how masculine you are. You try and hold that. Ah! I guess we know who's the most masculine person in this bar is. Well, I guess I'm a little bit masculine, a little bit anyway. Now the bonfire's burned down pretty well now. I'm going to throw a little bit more in. I'm afraid that my voice is going to quiver because I'm really scared about doing this. But I'm going to try and walk on these hot coals that we burned down from the bonfire. And what I'm going to kind of depend on is two effects. I've got 2 layers of socks on my feet and some cellophane inside the socks. I'm trying to trap the sweat inside on my feet. And I'm hoping that the sweat, boy, this whole area is really hot. I'm hoping that the sweat will do 2 things for me. Part of the sweat will help quench part of the coals that I touch when I walk across these hot coals, and I'll get a little bit of dead ash. And I hope some of the other sweat might give me some Leidenfrost effect where I get a little bit of vapor layer between the hot coals and my skin. I'm going to sit down. Even the chair is extremely hot. But I'm very quickly going to take off my shoes and socks and this piece of cellophane and walk right across. I've got to do it very quickly so that the kind of a little breeze through the area doesn't evaporate all the sweat off my feet before I have a chance to get across the coals. And boy, am I scared. I just hope that there's enough protection, Leiden-frost effect, and a little bit quenching of the fire to make this work. I'll do this very quickly. Both layers, cellophane, and here we go. A little bit of heat in a few places, but no massive damage at all. Leiden-frost effect helped protect my feet, a little bit of vapor layer, and probably quenched a little bit of the fire as I went across. I don't have thick calluses to protect my feet, just a kind of tender little skin there, and it was physics that protected my feet. But boy howdy, don't do this for yourself, because this is extremely dangerous. You can do massive damage to yourself, and it's just not worth that kind of damage to your feet. But that's the Leidenfrost effect in action.